August 4th, 1962, Saturday night. Los Angeles was hot and humid, a typical summer evening. While parties were being held in Hollywood Hills houses and artists were living their celebrity lives in nightclubs in Beverly Hills, at 12305 Fifth Helena Drive, Marilyn Monroe was alone in her own home. And that night, she had to face the most terrifying truth of her life. At 9:30 p.m., the phone rang. In Dean Martin's Beverly Hills home, while he was comfortably watching television, the phone's sound was heard. The caller was Marilyn Monroe. However, this wasn't the cheerful, bubbly Marilyn that Dean knew. There was a fear and desperation in her voice that Dean had never heard before. "Dean, I urgently need to see you," said Marilyn, her voice trembling. "We can't talk about this on the phone. There's something very important." Dean Martin had been living in the heart of Hollywood for 20 years. He had seen every kind of drama, crisis, and emergency. However, the tone in Marilyn's voice didn't resemble anything he had ever encountered before. It carried the fear of death itself. "Of course, Marilyn. I'm here for you," Dean replied. "Can we meet at my house?" "But Dean, don't tell anyone, absolutely no one. Please." What Dean Martin didn't know as he went to Marilyn's house that night was this. This meeting wasn't just a woman's final cry for help, but also the moment he would learn one of America's darkest secrets. Dean Martin arrived at Marilyn's house at 10:15 p.m. When she opened the door, the sight that greeted him shocked him. Marilyn Monroe, that legendary star known as the world's most beautiful woman, was in a terrible state. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup was smudged, her eyes were red. But the most striking thing was that her hands were trembling uncontrollably. "Dean, thank you for coming," said Marilyn, trying to compose herself. "Come in, please." There was a strange atmosphere in the house. The curtains were tightly drawn. Only a few lamps were on. Marilyn led Dean to the living room, and they sat across from each other. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Marilyn's hands were still trembling. "Marilyn, what happened? What's frightening you so much?" Dean asked in a genuinely concerned tone. Marilyn took a deep breath. Then she got up and went to a drawer on the other side of the room. From there, she pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. There was no writing on the envelope, but it was sealed and appeared quite heavy. "Dean," Marilyn began speaking slowly, "I'm in serious danger. Maybe tonight is my last night." Dean jumped to his feet. "Marilyn, what are you talking about? Who's threatening you?" Marilyn pressed the envelope to her chest, tears starting to flow from her eyes. "Dean, I learned some things I shouldn't have learned, and now they want to silence me." What Marilyn Monroe told Dean Martin that night wasn't just a crime. It was a conspiracy, a web of betrayal that reached America's highest offices. "Who, Marilyn? Who wants to silence you?" Dean insisted. Marilyn seemed to gather herself and began speaking slowly. However, what she said would turn Dean's world upside down. "Dean, you know about my relationship with Jack Kennedy, don't you?" Dean nodded. This wasn't a secret in Hollywood. Marilyn Monroe's relationship with President John F. Kennedy was gossip material. "Yes, but that's your private business, Marilyn." "It's not private, Dean. Not private at all." Marilyn's voice suddenly hardened. "I wasn't just Jack's mistress. I was the one carrying their messages." Dean was surprised. "What kind of messages?" "Secret meetings with the Soviet Union, CIA operations, plans regarding Cuba." Marilyn's voice lowered further. "Dean, I was carrying the president's and Bobby Kennedy's very classified information. They wanted me to use these topics when meeting with representatives from other countries." Dean's mouth fell open. "Marilyn, were you some kind of agent?" "Unwillingly." "Dean, unwillingly." Marilyn began to cry. "At first, I thought I just loved Jack. But they used me. They wanted me to carry messages to Moscow, to meet with Khrushchev's men. I was just a woman in love. I didn't understand political games." However, the real secret Marilyn Monroe had learned was even more horrifying. What she told Dean Martin that night exposed the darkest plan of the Cold War. "What about that envelope?" Dean pointed to the envelope. "What's in it?" Marilyn extended the envelope toward Dean. "Take this envelope, Dean. It contains all the evidence. Photographs, recordings, documents, Jack and Bobby's secret agreements with the Soviets, the CIA's planned operations in Cuba, even, Marilyn hesitated. Even what, Marilyn? Even their agreement with the mafia to kill Castro. Dean, they made a deal with the mafia. Those men you know, Sam Giancana, Johnny Roselli, they're all involved in this. Dean Martin's face turned white. He knew Sam Giant. He had even met with him a few times in Vegas. However, he had never thought this was part of such a large conspiracy. Marilyn, how did you learn all this? Jack would talk when he was drunk at night. Bobby thought I was stupid and would make phone calls in front of me. I recorded everything, Dean, everything. As Marilyn shook the envelope, Dean could hear the sound of audio tapes inside. They want to get rid of me now. I know too much, and they think I've become a dangerous burden. Marilyn's voice was almost a whisper. Dean, if something happens to me, nothing will happen to you, Dean interrupted, with a firm tone. This is nonsense. They can't do anything to you. They can, Dean, and they will. There was certainty in Marilyn's eyes. Bobby called me today. You've talked too much, Marilyn. It's time to be quiet, he said. Dean Martin didn't know yet that Marilyn Monroe's fear was completely justified, and what would happen the next night would make this conversation much more tragic. Dean took the envelope. It was thick and heavy. It was obvious that it contained dozens of documents, photographs, and audio tapes. Dean, keep this in a safe place. Don't show it to anyone. If something happens to me, give these documents to the right people at the right time. What right people? I don't know. But in the future, maybe 20, 30 years from now, people will be ready to learn the truth. Then bring out these documents. Dean hid the envelope behind his closet. Marilyn, what will you do now? I don't know, Dean. Maybe I'll run away to Europe or even farther. Don't run, Marilyn. Take this to the police. Give it to the FBI. Marilyn laughed with a bitter smile. Dean, the FBI is also involved in this. J. Edgar Hoover also knows all these secrets. They're part of this conspiracy too. Dean Martin felt the weight of this conversation. This wasn't just a celebrity scandal. This was the kind of revelation that would shake America's foundations. Dean, Marilyn stood up. Thank you so much for talking with me tonight. You're the only person I trust. Dean also stood up and hugged Marilyn. Marilyn, you're a strong woman. You'll get through this situation too. I hope so, said Marilyn. However, there was no hope in her voice. As Dean Martin returned home that night, he didn't know that this conversation would end with news that would shock the entire world the next day. August 5th, 1962, Sunday morning. Dean Martin was sipping his coffee and reading the newspaper when the phone rang. The caller was Frank Sinatra. Dean, did you hear the news? Frank's voice was serious and worried. What news, Frank? Marilyn Monroe is dead. Dean's coffee cup fell to the floor and shattered into pieces. What? What do you mean? This morning, her housekeeper found her dead in her bedroom. She took an overdose of sleeping pills. They're saying she committed suicide. Dean held his phone while the conversation from the previous night ran through his mind. Marilyn's fear, the envelope, and now she was dead. Dean, are you there? Yes, Frank. I'm in shock. We're all in shock. Should we go to the funeral together? Of course, Frank. After Dean hung up the phone, he went straight to his closet. The envelope was still there. The secrets inside felt even heavier. Now, Marilyn Monroe was dead, and Dean understood that her fear from the previous night had been justified. However, what Dean Martin didn't know in those days was this: Marilyn Monroe's death was just the beginning, and the secrets in that envelope would reveal much more horrifying truths in the years to come. Marilyn Monroe's funeral was held on August 8th, 1962, at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery. Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, and other big names from Hollywood were there. However, Dean's mind was constantly on that envelope. During the funeral ceremony, Dean noticed something strange. Some important names that should normally be at such ceremonies were absent, especially members of the Kennedy family. Neither JFK nor Bobby Kennedy had sent any message for the ceremony. This seemed very strange to Dean. After the ceremony, when Dean returned home, he decided to open the envelope. Marilyn was dead. He no longer had the obligation to protect her confidentiality. At least he needed to know what was inside. When he opened the envelope, what he saw shocked Dean even more. Inside were dozens of photographs, moments when JFK met with Soviet agents, pictures of Bobby Kennedy sitting at dinner tables with mafia leaders, copies of CIA documents. But the most shocking thing was the audio recordings. Dean took out his old record player and began listening to the recordings. In the first recording, JFK's voice could be heard. Marilyn, it's very important that you convey this message to Khrushchev. We're ready to make a secret agreement regarding Cuba. In the second recording, Bobby Kennedy arranged the meeting with Sam John Connor. We need them for the Castro job. In the third recording was an even more horrifying conversation. Bobby Kennedy's voice, Marilyn knows too much. She's becoming a risk now. We need to handle the problem. Dean Martin realized at that moment that Marilyn Monroe's death wasn't suicide. And the documents in his hands revealed not just an assassination, but one of the biggest conspiracies in American history. After listening to the recordings, Dean didn't know what to do. The information in his hands revealed not just Marilyn's death, but a conspiracy network involving America's highest-level officials. His first thought was to take these documents to the police. However, Marilyn's words came to mind. The FBI is also involved in this. So who would believe these documents? Who would investigate this matter? Dean put those documents in his home safe. He would wait for the right time as Marilyn had requested. But when would this right time come? Months and years passed. Dean Martin didn't tell anyone about this secret. He didn't tell Frank, didn't confide in any friend. He respected Marilyn's final wish and kept the documents safe. When JFK was assassinated in 1963, Dean thought this event might also be connected to the conspiracy in the documents. However, he still couldn't find the courage to reveal this information. When Bobby Kennedy was also assassinated in 1968, Dean began to fear even more. Everyone who knew these secrets was being eliminated one by one. Would his turn come? Dean Martin, who carried this secret for 30 years, would make a decision just days before his death that would finally bring these truths to light. The final days of 1995. Dean Martin was now 78 years old, and his health was rapidly deteriorating. Emphysema was destroying him, and he knew he would die soon. December 23rd, 1995. Dean was sitting in his house, holding that old envelope. He had carried this secret for 33 years. He had remained faithful to Marilyn's final wish. However, now on his deathbed, he had to make a decision. That night, Dean wrote a letter. He put this letter in the envelope and wrote on it, "To be opened 25 years after my death. Dean Martin, 1995. Dean gave this envelope to his lawyer and added a special clause to his will. He wanted this envelope to be opened in 2020 and its contents to be announced to the public. December 25th, 1995, Christmas Day. Dean Martin died. He took his secret to the grave. The envelope opened in 2020 brought to light not only Marilyn Monroe's death secret, but also the darkest conspiracy in American history. In January 2020, the time specified in Dean Martin's will expired. Dean's law firm delivered the envelope to Dean's daughter, Deanna Martin. When Deanna opened the envelope, she found the letter describing the conversations between her father and Marilyn Monroe and all the documents. At first, she thought these were fake. However, when she listened to the audio recordings, the voices really belonged to JFK and Bobby Kennedy. Deanna took these documents to independent audio analysis experts. The results were shocking. The recordings were real. She then had the photographs analyzed for dating. The photographs were also original, and from 1961 to 1962, Deanna Martin decided to reveal these documents to the public. In August 2020, on the 58th anniversary of Marilyn Monroe's death, she held a press conference. "My father carried this secret for 33 years, said Deanna. Now people have the right to learn the truth." When the documents were revealed, America was shaken. It was revealed that Marilyn Monroe's death was not suicide but assassination. The secret connections of JFK and Bobby Kennedy with the Soviets and the mafia were proven. Dean Martin's conversation with Marilyn Monroe on her final night is not just a story of friendship, but also the story of dark truths from an era. Marilyn Monroe's courage in preserving these secrets, and Dean Martin's protection of this secret for 33 years, is a very valuable document for history. This story teaches us, sometimes the truth can be much darker than we think, and sometimes protecting a secret is the greatest act of courage. The secret that Marilyn Monroe entrusted to Dean Martin on her final night was important not just for her own safety, but also for history to be written correctly. Dean's protection of this trust for 33 years is one of the most beautiful examples of friendship and loyalty.